Charlotte fell asleep somewhere around mile marker 42. I didn't notice right away because I was watching the road, but the cab got quieter and her breathing slowed, and then there was just the hum of the tires and the empty two-lane ahead. She'd asked me for a ride home, same as she'd been doing for 5 months, and I'd said, sure, same as I always do. But this time, she fell asleep with her phone face up in the console, and somewhere past midnight that screen lit up with a message I wasn't supposed to see. My name is Jack Stone. I'm 31 years old and I work at Harlow's Building Supply on Route 12, about 6 miles outside of Ashton, Oregon. Most mornings I'm loading lumber onto the flatbed by 6, and by afternoon I'm driving deliveries to job sites scattered across the valley. It's honest work and it keeps my hands busy, which is all I've ever asked of a job. I don't manage people, and I don't sit in meetings. I load, I drive, I unload, and I go home. Home is a small, one-story house on 3 acres at the end of Mill Creek Road. My father built the porch himself in 1989, and it still holds, which is more than you can say for most things. That old. I've got a dog named Rusty who doesn't care about much besides the kitchen floor and the sound of my truck pulling in. I've got a fridge that's usually half empty and a couch that's seen better years. And it's not much, but it's enough to come back to when the work is done. The truck is a 2004 Silverado with 200,000 miles on it and a bench seat that's shaped like me now, like it knows exactly how I sit. I bought it used from a guy in town who was upgrading to something newer and didn't care that the radio only picked up 2 stations, and I care even less about that. Most of the time I drive in silence, just the engine and the road noise and whatever's going on in my head, which isn't usually enough to fill the cab. I've got a rule about helping people. If someone asks, and I can do it, I do it. I don't ask why, and I don't keep a tally. That rule came from my father, who was the kind of man who'd pull over on the highway for a stranger with a flat and not think twice about it. He used to say that the world doesn't run on money or ambition. It runs on small favors between people who don't owe each other anything. I believed him then, and I believe him now, though he's been gone 9 years, and the porch he built is about the only thing he left behind that still works the way it's supposed to. Most of the time, that rule works fine. Somebody needs a jump, I pull over. Somebody's locked out, I climb through a window. Somebody needs a ride home. I turn the key and go. The thing about being the guy who always says yes is that people stop wondering about you. They figure you're simple, you're steady, you're the truck, not the destination. And for a long time that suited me fine. Being steady meant being safe. It meant nobody got close enough to see the parts that weren't so steady underneath. I don't say that to feel sorry for myself. I'm just telling you how it was. A man can get used to being the one who drives and never the one who arrives. After a while, he stops wondering what arriving might feel like. And then someone climbs into the passenger seat and changes the route, and he starts wondering all over again whether he's been driving past something he should have stopped for. Charlotte Decker works at the Ash Tree Cafe on Main Street, the one with the hand-painted sign and the blue door that doesn't quite close right. She's 25 and she moved to Ashton about a year before I started noticing her around town, which is to say about 7 months before she ever spoke to me. She has dark hair, she ties back when she's working and lets fall past her shoulders when she's not, and she's got a way of looking at you that makes you feel like she's paying attention even when the cafe is full and 3 people are waving for the check. I didn't know any of that when she first asked me for a ride. I just knew she was the woman from the cafe and that her car had been sitting in the parking lot behind the laundromat with a flat tire for 3 days. It was a Thursday night in November, already dark by 5, and I was walking out of Harlow's with my coat half on when she came up the hill from Main Street carrying a canvas bag and looking like she'd had a long day. She stopped when she saw me, and I could tell she was working up to something because she shifted her weight from one foot to the other and tightened her grip on the bag strap. "Hey," she said, "you're Jack, right from Harlow's?" I nodded. "I'm Charlotte, from the cafe. I was wondering if you might be heading toward the east side of town tonight. My car's got a flat and the shop can't look at it until Monday, and the bus doesn't run past 8. The east side was exactly where I was heading. My house was out that way, past the old mill bridge. She didn't know that, which meant she was just asking around, and I happened to be the one standing there at the right time. "Sure," I said. "I'm going right past there," she smiled, and it was a relieved kind of smile, the kind that drops a person's shoulders an inch. "Thank you. I really appreciate it." She climbed into the truck and put her bag between her feet, and then she talked the whole way. Not nervous talking, exactly, but more than I was used to from passengers. Most people who ride with me settle in and go quiet after a minute. Charlotte told me about the cafe, about how the owner was thinking of adding a dinner menu, about how her apartment was above the shoe repair shop on Birch Street, about how she'd moved to Ashton from a town outside Salem because she wanted to live somewhere smaller. I didn't say much. I listened, and I drove, and when I pulled up in front of her building, she said, "Thank you" twice, and grabbed her bag and climbed out. But before she closed the door, she stood there for a second, looking back into the cab, and she said, "You're a good driver, Jack. I felt safe the whole way." I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said goodnight and waited until she got inside before I pulled away. The next Tuesday, she texted me. I don't know how she got my number. Probably from the board at Harlow's where customers leave their info for delivery calls. Her message was short. "Hey, this is Charlotte from the cafe. Any chance you're heading east again tonight? My car's still at the shop." I texted back, "Sure, same time." And that was the start of it. After the second ride, it became a pattern without either of us saying it was a pattern. Tuesday nights, sometimes Fridays, sometimes a random Wednesday when the weather turned bad, or her shift ran late. She'd text me, and I'd drive over, and she'd climb in with her bag and her coffee and whatever story she'd picked up that day, and we'd head east across the mill bridge toward her side of town. I started noticing things. Small things that didn't mean anything by themselves but stacked up over the weeks, like notes I kept forgetting to read. She always sat in the passenger seat. Even when I offered to throw her bag in the back so she'd have more room, she kept it on the floor between her feet and stayed up front, close enough that I could smell whatever soap she used, something clean and faint that hung in the cab after she was gone. She asked about my day before she talked about hers every time. "How was Harlow's today?" Or "Did you get many deliveries?" It wasn't the kind of small talk you give a stranger you're stuck in a car with. It was a kind of question where the answer mattered to her, even if she didn't know how to show it, and she put her phone face down in the console, every single ride. I assumed she was checking messages or scrolling through something and didn't want me seeing her screen, which was fine. People are entitled to their privacy. But the face down thing was deliberate. It wasn't a casual placement. She set it down like she was putting it away, and I got the sense it wasn't about me seeing something. It was about her not being distracted from whatever was happening in the truck. One Friday night in January, we were driving home through a freezing rain that turned the bridge to black ice, and I was going slow and watching the road, and she'd gone quiet for the first time since I'd known her. After a while, she said barely above the sound of the wipers, "I like it here." I glanced at her and back at the road. "In the truck in Ashton," she said. "But yeah, here too." I took it at face value. She liked the town. That made sense. Small towns grow on you. I didn't think about the second part, the part about the truck, because thinking about that would have taken me somewhere I wasn't prepared to go. See, I'd made a kind of peace with myself a long time ago. I'm not the kind of man women look at that way. I'm broad and plain, and I come home with sawdust in my hair and diesel on my boots. I'm steady, which is a good quality in a friend or a neighbor, but not the kind of thing that makes a woman's heart beat faster. I know that the way I know the bridge is icy in January, and I don't fight it because fighting it just makes you slide. So when Charlotte was kind to me, I filed it under friendship. When she brought me a coffee from the cafe on the mornings after a ride, I filed it under gratitude. When she remembered my birthday in March and left a card on the seat of my truck with a drawing of a dog that looked nothing like Rusty, I filed it under thoughtfulness. There was a night in April when I pulled up to the cafe and she was standing outside in the rain waiting for me, instead of staying inside where it was dry. She could have waited under the awning, but she walked out to the truck in a thin jacket, getting wet, just to be there when I pulled in. I asked her why she didn't wait inside, and she said the cafe was too warm and she wanted the air. That answer sat wrong with me for about 2 seconds before I put it in a drawer and closed it. I kept her at arm's length because I thought that was the right thing to do. Not for me. For her. I figured if she ever got the wrong idea about me, if she ever let herself think I was something more than a guy with a truck and a free evening, she'd be disappointed. And the last thing I wanted was for Charlotte Decker to look at me the way people sometimes do when they realize the thing they hoped for isn't there. I was protecting her. That's what I told myself. And it was partly true. But underneath that, I was protecting me, because the one thing worse than her not seeing me that way would be her seeing me that way and then changing her mind. And I'd find out later that the wall I'd built around myself had a crack in it I didn't know about, and the person who found it wasn't me. It was a Saturday in late May when everything shifted. The days had gotten long, and the evenings were warm enough to leave the windows down. And Charlotte had asked me to pick her up from the community hall on Fletcher Avenue after some kind of fundraiser dinner that had run later than anyone planned. I was sitting in the truck outside the hall at 10:15 when she came down the steps. She was wearing a blue dress that I'd never seen before, something simple with thin straps, and her hair was down and her shoulders were bare, and the porch light caught her in a way that made me look twice before I caught myself doing it. She opened the door and climbed in and pulled the strap of her bag across her lap. "Sorry, it went so late," she said. Mrs. Calloway wouldn't stop talking about her daughter's wedding. "No rush," I said. She settled into the seat and tucked her feet up under her and leaned her head against the window. The dress caught the light from the dashboard, and I could see the curve of her shoulder and the way her collarbone moved when she breathed, and I kept my eyes on the road because that's what I do. We took the long way home because the main road was blocked by a crew doing night work on the overpass. I turned on to the old county highway, the 2-lane that runs along the river before it curves back toward town, and the truck settled into the kind of quiet rhythm that only happens after 10 on a warm night when the road is empty. Charlotte talked for a while about the fundraiser and the people she'd sat next to, and how the lasagna was somehow both burnt and cold at the same time. She made me laugh, which wasn't hard, but the way she told it, like she was letting me in on a secret, made the cab feel smaller than it usually did. Then she asked me something she'd never asked before. "Jack, do you ever think about leaving Ashton?" I looked at the road and thought about it. "Not really," I said. "Everything I need is here." "Everything?" she said, and the way she said it had a softness to it that I didn't know what to do with, like she was asking about something specific but didn't want to name it. "Most things," I said. She nodded and turned her head toward the window, and the conversation drifted into silence after that. Then she got quieter, not all at once, but gradually, like the volume turning down on a song. Her sentences got shorter and her pauses got longer, and somewhere around the bend in the river where the headlights sweep across the water before cutting back into the trees, she stopped talking altogether. I glanced over, and her eyes were half closed. That heavy-lidded look people get when they're fighting sleep and losing. The window was cool against her temple, and her hands were resting in her lap, and her breathing had slowed to something deep and even. "Charlotte," I said softly, "not to wake her, but just to check. You still with me?" She made a sound that wasn't quite a word, something between a hum and a yes, and then her head tilted further against the glass, and her eyes closed completely. I turned the radio off. I eased off the gas a little, not because I was in a hurry, but because the truck rides smoother at 50 than at 60, and I wanted her to stay asleep. I don't know why that mattered to me. It just did. Her phone was sitting in the center console, face up this time, which was different from every other ride. She must have set it down without thinking, the way you do when you're too tired to remember your own rules. The screen was dark, but it was right there between us, and every now and then the headlights of a passing truck would flash across it, and I'd see the faint outline of her thumbprint on the glass. The road went quiet. The river slid past on the driver's side, black and slow and full of the kind of silence that only water makes at night. The air coming through the window smelled like pine and warm asphalt, and something else, something that might have been her soap or her shampoo, or just the particular way the world smells when you're driving home at midnight with someone sleeping beside you who trusts you enough to close her eyes. The stars were out over the valley more than you ever see from town, and the dashboard cast a faint green glow over her hands, in her lap, and the phone in the console, and the gear shift between us that felt like it was marking a border I'd been standing behind for 5 months. I drove and I watched the road and I kept both hands on the wheel and I didn't think about anything except the next mile marker and the one after that. That's who I am. I'm the man who watches the road. But then her phone lit up. It happened fast. 1 second the console was dark, and the next the screen was glowing white, and a notification banner slid down from the top with a preview I couldn't have avoided reading if I tried, because it was right there in the middle of my field of vision, between the speedometer and the gear shift, closer to me than her sleeping face. The preview was a text message. The sender name said Emma, and the words underneath said, "I wish he knew why I always ask him for a ride." Then the screen went dark again. The notification faded after maybe 4 seconds, like phones do, and the console went back to black, and it was just me and the road and the sound of her breathing. But I'd seen it, and I couldn't unsee it. My hands tightened on the wheel. I could feel the knuckles go white, that thick pressure in the grip that comes before you realize you're holding on too hard. I forced myself to ease up, and I checked the mirror, and I kept the truck steady, because that's who I am. I keep things steady, even when something inside me is shaking. I didn't pick up the phone or touch it or lean over to see if there was more, if the thread went on, if she'd said other things I wasn't supposed to know. That would have been a violation, and I don't violate people's trust, especially not people who fall asleep in my truck. But the words were already inside my head, and they weren't going anywhere. I wish he knew why I always ask him for a ride. Not I need a ride. Not my car's broken again. Not any of the practical, sensible, just being, friendly reasons I've been filing away for 5 months. That's not about transportation. That's not about a flat tire or a late shift or a bus schedule. That's about wanting to be in the truck, wanting to be in the cab, wanting to be close to someone who she thought didn't notice. And the I wish he knew part, that meant she'd been hoping I'd figure it out on my own. She'd been leaving signs and waiting for me to read them. And I hadn't. For 5 months, I hadn't. The cab went quiet in a different way than before. Before, the silence had been comfortable, the kind of quiet you share with someone who doesn't need to fill the air with words. Now the silence had weight. It pressed down on my chest and it sat in the space between us, and it made every breath I took feel like it was loud enough to wake her. She stirred a little, shifting her weight against the window, and I held my breath without meaning to. But she settled again, and her breathing went back to its slow rhythm, and I was alone with what I knew. I looked at the road ahead and the white lines running toward me and the dark shapes of the trees pressing in from both sides, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, something I'd spent years making sure I wouldn't feel. Because the last time I let it in, it took everything I had and gave nothing back. What I felt was hope, and it was dangerous and terrifying. The kind that makes a man want to pull over and wake her up and say something he can't take back. The kind that makes his hands shake on the wheel and his throat go tight and his chest feel like it's full of something that's been locked in a room for years and just heard the key turn. I wanted to say her name. I wanted to say it the way you say someone's name when you finally see them, when the version of them you've been pretending is small and manageable suddenly gets big and real and fills up the whole cab. But she was asleep and the road was dark and I had no right to wake her with something I couldn't take back. I didn't pull over. I kept driving. For the next 15 miles I drove and I replayed every ride, every Tuesday, every Friday, every small thing I'd noticed and dismissed and filed away in a drawer I never opened. The first ride was in November, dark and cold. She thanked me twice and lingered at the door before going inside. I'd thought she was just being polite. But polite people thank you once and leave. Polite people don't stand in the open door of your truck looking back into the cab like they're not ready to go. The rides after that, the way she always sat up front, close enough that the console between us felt like a border neither of us was willing to cross, but neither of us wanted to move away from either. The way she asked about my day before she talked about hers, like my answer was the thing she'd been waiting to hear all afternoon, the coffee she brought me on the mornings after. She'd show up at Harlow's with the paper cup from the ashtray, and she'd hand it to me across the counter and say something like, "You look tired last night," or "Figured you could use this," and I'd take it and say thanks and drink it on the drive back to the yard and think nothing of it. But nobody else brought me coffee. Nobody else noticed when I looked tired. Her birthday card in March. The drawing of the dog that looked nothing like Rusty. The way she'd laughed when I told her the nose was too long and she said I did my best. The way she'd put her hand on my arm for just a second when she said it, a touch so brief I might have imagined it, except I didn't imagine it. I just pretended I did. The night she said, "I like it here, not in Ashton," in the truck, in the space between us, with the engine running, and the dark outside, and the whole world reduced to the two of us and the road ahead. She was telling me something, and I didn't hear it because I'd taught myself not to listen. There was one more. A Tuesday in early May, the last ride before the night, everything changed. We'd stopped at the red light by the mill bridge, and she'd been quiet for a stretch, which was unusual for her, and then she said without looking at me, "You know what I like about riding with you?" I waited, thinking she was going to say something about the truck being warm or the route being faster. She said, "You never asked me to explain myself." And I didn't know what she meant by that, so I just said, "You don't have to." And she turned and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read then but can read now, because now I know what she was trying to say and what I was too blind to hear. And the phone, face down on every ride, which was deliberate, not because she was hiding something from me, but because she was trying not to be distracted from me. She put the phone away so she could be present, so she could pay attention, so she could sit in that cab and feel whatever she was feeling without being pulled somewhere else. Tonight, she forgot. Tonight she was tired, and the phone went face up, and the notification came through, and Emma, whoever Emma was the person Charlotte trusted enough to tell the truth to the truth she couldn't say to me. Every detail rearranged itself in my mind like a picture coming into focus. Every moment I'd explained away now lined up on the other side of the argument, the side I'd refused to look at because looking at it meant facing what it would mean if I was wrong. And that was the thing. I could have been wrong. Maybe I wish he knew why I always ask him for a ride meant something else entirely. Maybe she had a reason that wasn't about me at all. Maybe Emma was her sister, and the conversation was about something I was reading too much into. But that didn't fit either. That didn't fit the way she looked at me when I picked her up, or the way she always found a reason to touch my arm, or the way she said "here too" when she said she liked it in the truck. I could try to explain all of it away, but I'd have to work at it. And the truth about explanations that take work is that they're usually not the real ones. The real explanation was the one I was afraid of. Charlotte Decker didn't ask me for rides because her car was broken. She asked me for rides because she wanted to be in the truck with me, and I'd spent 5 months making sure I never saw it. I didn't wake her or say anything or pull over or turn around or change my speed by a single mile per hour. I kept the truck at 55, and I kept my eyes on the white lines, and I let the miles go by without making a sound. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid. And I can say that now, even if I couldn't say it then. I was afraid of what would happen if I opened my mouth and let the truth come out. Not the truth about her, which I was still half convinced I'd misunderstood. The truth about me. The last time I let myself hope for something more than what was right in front of me. I was 26, and her name was Amanda, and she was the receptionist at the dental office on 3rd Street. She smiled at me every time I came in to pick up supplies, and one day she asked me to have coffee, and I said yes, and for 3 months I thought something was building between us. Then I asked her to dinner, and she looked at me like I'd misread a sign, and she said, very gently, that she'd just been being friendly, that she was like that with everyone, and that she was sorry if she'd given me the wrong idea. I wasn't angry. I was something worse than angry. I was embarrassed down to my bones, in the way a man is when he realizes he's been living inside a story he made up while the real story was going on without him. I drove home that night with the radio off and the windows up and the cab completely silent, and I sat in my driveway for 10 minutes before I went inside, just sitting there with the engine off, feeling like the whole world could see through me. After Amanda, I built a wall. Not a dramatic one, not the kind anyone could see. Just a quiet decision that I wouldn't let myself hope again. I rearranged my life around that decision without even realizing I was doing it. I stopped going to the diner on Saturdays because she might be there. I started taking the long way home from Harlow's so I wouldn't drive past the dental office. I made my world smaller and quieter and safer, and I told myself it was fine, that some men aren't built for that kind of thing, and I was one of them. Hope is the thing that makes you vulnerable, and being vulnerable is the thing that makes you a fool. And I'd been a fool once, and that was enough. So when Charlotte started asking me for rides and smiling at me across the cafe counter and putting her phone face down so she could pay attention to me, I told myself it was friendship. I told myself it was gratitude. I told myself it was anything except what it looked like, because if I admitted what it looked like and I was wrong, I'd be that fool again. Sitting in my truck outside a woman's apartment, having built a whole future in my head that she never agreed to. But now there was a text message on her phone that said something different. Someone else knew the truth and had written it down, and I'd seen it, and the wall I'd built had a crack in it wide enough to see through. The problem with the crack was that I couldn't see all the way to the other side. I could see enough to know there was something there, something real, but I couldn't see if it was what I wanted it to be or just the shadow of something else. And opening that crack any further, saying something to her, admitting what I'd seen, would mean stepping through it, and once you step through, you can't step back. If I said something and I was right, everything changes. The rides stop being rides and start being something else, something I don't know how to do, something that scares me more than I can say, because the last time I tried it, I got it wrong, and I've spent 5 years making sure I never tried again. If I said something and I was wrong, I lose the rides and the Tuesday nights and the coffee in the mornings, and the only person who makes my quiet life feel like it has a window in it. I lose Charlotte, not as a passenger, but as a presence. The thing I look forward to without admitting I look forward to it. I couldn't risk either outcome, so I did what I always do. I kept both hands on the wheel, and I watched the road, and I told myself that the smart thing, the safe thing, the steady thing was to drive her home like I always did and never say a word about what I saw. But the thing about walls is that once you see through the crack, you can't unsee what's on the other side. And what I saw wasn't empty. It wasn't the void I'd been guarding against, it was her. It was Charlotte, sitting in my truck 5 months running, choosing to be here when she could be anywhere, telling her friend that she wished I understood why. I wasn't ready to break the wall down, but I wasn't going to pretend anymore that it wasn't cracking. And when the truck finally turned onto her street and she started to wake up, I had about 90 seconds to decide what kind of man I was going to be when she opened her eyes. She stirred as the truck turned onto Birch Street. I could see her coming awake in stages, the way people do when they've been sleeping hard and the world pulls them back. First, a small shift of her shoulders, then a slow blink, then her hand reaching for the window to feel the air. "Hey," she said, her voice soft and rough with sleep. "How long was I out?" "About 20 minutes," I said. It was closer to 30, but I didn't want her to know she'd slept through the most important stretch of road I'd ever driven. She sat up a little and looked out the window, orienting herself. Birch Street was quiet, just the street lights and the dark windows of the shoe repair shop below her apartment. She ran a hand through her hair and yawned. And then she turned and looked at me. Not a glance, a look. The kind that stays a second longer than usual, the kind that searches your face for something you might not know is showing. "You always get me home safe," she said. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice to say anything more than that. She reached for her phone in the console and picked it up. I watched her fingers close around it, and I waited for some sign that she'd seen the notification, some shift in her expression that would tell me she knew I might have seen it too. But she just tucked the phone into her bag without looking at the screen. Or if she looked, she didn't react. Her face was calm and a little sleepy, and there was nothing in it that said she was thinking about anything except being home. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe the notification was still unread, waiting for her to unlock the phone and find Emma's message and remember that she'd left her screen visible to a man who was too polite to look, but too human not to see. Or maybe she did know. Maybe she'd felt the glow through her eyelids or heard the faint vibration of the phone against the console plastic, and she was choosing not to say anything about it the same way I was choosing not to say anything about it, and the two of us were sitting in a truck full of things neither of us would say out loud. The streetlight outside her building made a yellow circle on the pavement, and in that light I could see her more clearly than I'd allowed myself to look all night. The blue dress, the loose hair, the way she was sitting with her bag in her lap and her phone tucked away, and her eyes still soft from sleep. She looked like someone who'd just come from a place where things were simpler and wasn't quite ready for the world to be complicated. Again, I pulled up in front of her building and put the truck in park. The engine idled, and the cab filled with that particular silence that happens when the driving is done, and the only thing left is the leaving. She reached for the door handle, and her fingers closed around it, and I could see her arm flex like she was about to pull. And then she stopped. Her hand stayed on the handle, but she didn't open the door. She sat there for a moment, looking through the windshield at her building, at the dark windows and the blue door that was 3 steps and a staircase away. The streetlight caught the side of her face, and I could see her jaw set. That small tightness that comes before someone decides to do something they've been putting off. "Jack," she said. I looked at her. "Next Tuesday," she said. "Same time?" I could have said, "Sure." I could have said, "Same as always." I could have kept the wall up and the answer simple and driven away with everything exactly the way it's been for 5 months, safe and steady and unchanged. "Charlotte," I said, and the way I said her name was different from every other time I'd said it. It came out slower and lower with a weight in it that I couldn't have hidden even if I'd tried, and I saw something move across her face when she heard it. Recognition, maybe. Or relief. or the same dangerous hope that was sitting on my chest like a hand? Yeah, she said barely above a whisper. I'm not just a ride, I said. The words hung in the cab between us. They weren't a question, and they weren't an accusation. They were just the truth. Finally, after 5 months of keeping it in a drawer I never opened. She didn't look away. Her hand was still on the door handle, but she wasn't pulling it anymore. Her eyes were wet and wide, and she looked like someone who'd been standing on the edge of something for a long time and just felt the ground shift under her feet. I know, she said. I've never thought you were just a ride. Then she opened the door, and the night air came in, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk, and she stood there with the door open and looked back at me one more time. Tuesday, she said. I nodded. She closed the door and walked up the steps, and I sat there in the idling truck with my hands on the wheel and the cab still full of her, the faint trace of that clean soap smell and the shape she left in the passenger seat and the echo of the way she'd said, I know. I drove home with the windows down and the warm night blowing through and the river dark on the driver's side, and something cracked open inside my chest that I'd sealed shut a long time ago, not broken, but just opened. Tuesday was 3 days away, and for the first time in 5 years I wasn't dreading the wait. If you want to know what happens when a man who's been driving in circles finally decides to stop, subscribe. The ride isn't over.